I ended up going to Gaza to provide medical aid January 7th. This is just a picture of me trying to inspire the next generation of kids in Gaza. But to start, for those that don't know, this is what Gaza looks like. And so we actually had to travel to Jordan and drive through Israel to get to Gaza because we were not allowed to fly directly to Israel. And so it's hard to see out here, but so we crossed around here near the Dead Sea, and so, or actually up there near the Dead Sea, and so we actually had to go south to get to the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is the only crossing that is open going in and out of Gaza. Rafah was closed, so we could not come through Egypt. Um, and so when we arrived in Israel, after crossing the King Hussein Bridge, this is myself and the 13 other healthcare workers who are with us. 11 of us are doctors. Initially, we were a group of 18, but five people were arbitrarily denied entry for no reason which was ever given. And so this is us in the bus, but what you don't see is behind us, there's a military vehicle, and in front of us, there's a military vehicle because we were accompanied by military vehicles from the border driving through Israel to make sure we didn't stop. But so we had anesthesiologists, ophthalmologists, facial surgeons, ER docs, nurses, all with us on this mission. This is actually what Kerem Shalom looks like from the inside. The buses arrive and they actually leave you here. This is on our way out, but I thought it helped to show it. These are, good 30-foot concrete barriers that they've just erected. They use it to make kind of quick fortifications. And so on the other side of this picture are men with machine guns who the buses all stop here because no vehicles are allowed in and out of Gaza. And so buses and aid actually stop at Kerem Shalom. We're unloaded and the aid is also unloaded there, and then local cars from Gaza have to come pick us up. And so we took all our baggage and walked from here around like almost half a kilometer through the gate. This is from the Palestinian side looking into Israel. And so you pass through about 6 or 7 gates as you're coming through from Israel into Gaza. Once we crossed over, this is the other staging area while we're waiting for permission from the IDF to actually move through Gaza. We were accompanied, or we saw a bunch of UN vehicles. All these vehicles, it's hard to make out, but are armor plated, and the people there are wearing bulletproof vests, which definitely kind of highlighted the seriousness of the situation we're in. Because we don't have bulletproof vests, but hopefully we're okay. As you approach from the south, remember Kerem Shalom was on the edge of Rafah. Rafah was one of the red zones that Israel completely cleared out. And so all the buildings in Rafah are like this. They're leveled. This is actually the old airport in Gaza, which was built in the early 2000s, but ultimately was destroyed. And actually not this conflict, a previous conflict, but per the people there, it actually got like even more destroyed. Like they bombed a bombed out building. As we're driving to Khan Yunis, which is the biggest city in the south, we passed an elementary school for boys. It's also been bombed. I took this picture because mosques are a place where traditionally a lot of people will gather, and so they are very frequently targets. I was just impressed that this minaret is still standing, but you can see the mosque has been completely leveled. I'm a pediatrician. Ultimately, one of the things that drew me to that field is just, the amazing resilience that kids have, and their ability to kind of find joy in everyday, really like simple things. And so this is a group of 5 boys who were just throwing one rock at another rock, but that's what they were doing. They were having fun, irrespective of all the destruction around them. And so in Khan Yunis, the largest hospital is the Nasser Medical Hospital, medical complex. And so that's where we went and stayed because I actually forgot to mention it. Over here near Wadi Gaza is the Netzarim corridor that Israel cut through Gaza to separate the north and the south. And so this is a militarized corridor. Nobody's allowed to cross it without explicit permission from the IDF. And so we went and stayed in Khan Yunis while we waited for permission to be able to go north to Gaza City, where our main mission was. And so Nasser Medical Complex was also sieged as well. And one of the things that stood out to me is this is actually a dialysis center. In Gaza, there was no functioning dialysis center still remaining. For those that don't know, somebody who's on dialysis will have to get hooked up to a machine for 2 to 3 hours a week, about 3 to 4 times a week. And so they don't have time for anything other than making sure that their blood is getting clean because their kidneys no longer work. But if you look at this hospital, if you look at this building, there is not a bullet that has been fired at it. There's not a shell. this hospital, this building was lit on fire, and you can see kind of the ash and remains from that. That would prove to be a common theme, just kind of the assault on healthcare overall that we saw in Gaza. These are all ambulances that have been bombed out and destroyed. These same ambulances, these same ambulances, they look like they're functional, but that's because they were there when the hospital was sieged. And so on their way out, the military actually cut all the wiring within the cars, within the ambulances themselves. And if you recall, no vehicles get into Gaza, no car parts get into Gaza either. And so these ambulances are just sitting there. Uh, yeah, this is just kind of a zoomed in perspective on that. One of the other things that comes up now is since this hospital was sieged, it's very common in Gaza for green spaces to be used as burial grounds. And so the doctors at the hospital, or the people at the hospital, told us that when they actually got back into it after the Israeli military withdrew, they found a mass grave right there of like 150 bodies. There's another one over there by the wall of another like 100 bodies, like another 150 bodies. And then the hospital itself, there's areas of it that have been shelled, but the one spot I was at here, once it turned, these are all the damaged ambulances as well. Once it turned, you can see has actually been shot at multiple times with just kind of yeah. And so this is clearly a hospital, but it's been shot at. But it had not been bombed like the other five hospitals that I ended up going into in Gaza. And this used to be a date plantation, but had been run over and trampled by and destroyed by tanks and bulldozers. And so people would report walking around in this area and finding just random body parts sticking out of the ground. While we were waiting to cross the Nasrim corridor, it's like kind of at this corner right here. We were just staring in the distance, and this we just kept on repeatedly seeing tank fire. Let me see if I can turn on the audio. Actually,
They wait for ambulances, but
yeah,
and then they hit it again.
yeah. It's so okay.
Let's see what can.
So yeah. Let's go back to slideshow mode. All right. And so this is actually when we started driving up. There's a coastal road and there's the Saladin road that go mainly north to south in Gaza. And so at the time, only the coastal road was open. And so as we were driving, we know that this area is a red zone and nobody's allowed to be there. And so you would find this is a little hard to make out, but this is actually a human body. Here's his head. Here's parts of his ribs that have just started decaying in the street because nobody's able to get to those bodies because they're not going to put their life on the line to go get them. The actual Netzarim corridor, the area that we crossed, looked like this. There's just a little bit of like a pillbox and like a metal barrier right in front of us. But in here, there's actually no military. There's just a camera and a speaker. And so our very brave driver got out and actually showed all our passports to the camera. And then there's a fort off in the distance over here where a drone actually flew out, came, and went around the bus, and we had to open the windows so it could see and make sure that everybody who's in the bus is everybody who is approved and who has their passports there. While we were waiting for all this to happen, this took like a good 3 hours while we were waiting. Two Humvees came out of the fort, started firing rounds towards the ocean from the 50 cal they have on it. And you see the tracer rounds and everything going around off, and you hear them. And then they actually pulled up next to us and started firing as well towards the ocean, pointlessly, but I guess to just scare us off. But we managed to get through and continued on to the north. In the north, this is actually the Baptist Hospital. It's also known as the Ahl Arabi Hospital. This hospital used to be a Baptist church opened in the early 1900s and hospital. And so because of just the sheer volume of patients that they have, every space that they have has been converted into, inpatient units. And so these buildings back here, there's patients up here on those floors. This building used to be a physical therapy like shed, and they turned it into an inpatient unit. This is actually the church itself. The church itself has also been turned into an inpatient unit. And then over here are all the green spaces in the hospital that have been turned into graves, unfortunately. You can see even this hospital has been peppered with small arms fire. The roof is destroyed. And when we turn around, you can see actually the outline on the ground. These are all tents. These are all inpatient units as well. And so let me see if I can pause it. Oh, that doesn't pause it. How to pause this? Okay. So over here, the tile is different because right in the middle of the hospital, a bomb was dropped and actually cratered and completely destroyed the tile. You can see that like where the shrapnel just destroyed it in a sec here. Yeah, so all this tile has been just completely damaged because of like the shrapnel and the bomb blast. And right where this doctor is standing, he's the head of this hospital, he's an orthopedic surgeon, is where this bomb was dropped in the middle of a hospital. This is actually the inside of the what used to be the church. It's now been converted all into inpatient hospital units. They just literally just put curtains on a rod and put curtains between one patient and the next. This is the second hospital I kind of worked at. It's also the hospital we slept at. This is the Gaza General Services Hospital. Sorry, this first hospital, the Ahlil Baptist, the Baptist Hospital, is where all the mass casualty events would be staged. So all the ambulances, when there was a bombing, would go pick up people and bring them here. And so you have to figure out who's going to survive, who, even with medical intervention, is not going to survive, and who can wait on medical intervention when you see these patients. Um, and so for patients who would survive with medical intervention, if they needed surgery, they would come to the Gaza General Services Hospital where we slept. And so over here in the distance is one of the surgeons who actually shared the room with us and lived with us because he was functionally houseless. And so this hospital behind these curtains, there's no glass because the hospital itself has been bombed. The top two floors of the hospital are closed. The elevator doesn't work, which seems inconsequential, but when you're trying to move a patient on a bed, it's a big deal. But so because there's no windows, one, it would get very cold at night, and so we would just have to make do with blankets. And then anytime there's an airstrike or shelling or anything near us, it creates an air pressure wave. And so you would feel that in your chest. You would feel the building shake if there was bombing that was particularly close to us. One night, like right across the street from us, they fired a missile into an apartment, and like we all woke up and thought that we had actually been hit from the sound. But as the people in Gaza taught me, you start to learn the distance that airstrikes are happening because you'll hear the plane and you'll hear the bomb, and you can kind of figure out how far it is based off the time between one and the next. Um, yeah, this is the outside of the hospital where we're at. You know, no windows, just curtains. But one of the things I want to try and convey is there's still life and joy in Gaza, and that we're obliged to protect. And so these were just kids who had set up a trampoline right outside the hospital, just having the best time. On my way to work the first day, so people understand like the damage these bombs can do. This is about an eight-story building. It just destroyed one of the main columns on the side, and all the floors just kind of collapsed on top of each other. And then this is just particularly nice artwork that I thought was relevant. This is outside the hospital. The hospital building is back there, but you can see there's even still buildings in Gaza. Most of them wouldn't pass an engineering inspection. Some are better than others, but there is some places for people to shelter, and there are people sheltering in them. It's not like these buildings are empty. There's people who live in them despite the destruction that they've had. This is the outside of the main hospital I worked at, the Patient Friends Benevolent Society. This is actually a children's hospital. I know the roof is falling apart. That's because this hospital has also been bombed and burned before. And actually, right out here on this kind of outer step, I was hanging out, passing candy to kids. And an airstrike happened like a block away from us. I can point to in another video. And so the other important thing Palestinians taught us is the airstrike that'll kill you, you won't hear it because the plane and the bomb move faster than the speed of sound. And so if you hear it, you're all right. And then also don't run unless you see the Palestinians running. And so while we were standing out here, I heard a plane and a bomb all within like a fraction of a second. What to me had previously been a clear day was suddenly, interrupted by this bomb going off like a block away from us. And everybody in the street proceeded to run inside the hospital. And that was probably the most like scared I've been while I was in Gaza. It really it highlighted for me that like even though it may not be intentional to target me or there may be whatever I don't going even out of their way to avoid me. very easily I could accidentally end up just like any one of the other patients we have on the gurneys. And so um, all our movement was heavily controlled, heavily restricted. We were only allowed to go in the bus that was identified with the mission trip, and they would give daily reports that we're sending a person to this hospital, a person to this hospital. But that's intentional, and that helped in terms of even for the Palestinians to know that that hospital was safe and wasn't going to be targeted because there were international aid groups working there. This is what the view from the inpatient side of the hospital looked like. This is a UNRWA school. The blue and white usually UN colors. This is a burnt out ambulance, and there's just plenty of trash in Gaza, which because there's no longer a trash service that has just been piling up. Um, Ultimately, like it leads to increased infections and sickness kind of amongst the people, but there's no time and no ability to fix this. This is the front side of the hospital, right kind of across the street from here is where the airstrike actually happened. You can see the building next to this hospital has been burned out. This is the hospital itself. Oh, and then this building is the one that was destroyed in the airstrike. So it was the closest I've been to an airstrike that they've done, and it is very disturbing when you see kind of the after effects of just kind of something that was there. This is actually the roof of the hospital that we were working in. You can see it's been completely destroyed. They tried, fixing it with some new timber, but they don't even have tiles to put on the new roof, and so they just stretched tarps over it. At the same time, sensitive medical equipment was stored in a second tent inside the hospital to prevent it from getting wet because it rains in Gaza. I was not there for this, but this is actually a picture of what the hospital looked like after it was sieged. If you remember the facade of the hospital over there and the weird kind of like 45-degree angle it has. I repeat, this is a children's hospital, and it looks like hit with tank shells and then lit on fire. Uh, One of the issues that kind of things that I take for granted working here in the U.S. is that my patients will always have oxygen if I turn on the valve on the wall. That's not the case in Gaza, where all the hospitals have had their O2 generators destroyed in the bombings. And so there is one hospital that is non-functional that still has an oxygen concentrator. And, in the morning, like 4 or 5 hospitals will actually send people out in trucks with tanks to fill up oxygen tanks and bring them back. And then you just hook up all these oxygen tanks to the hospital system. And then there's an alarm that actually goes off every 2 hours to let you know that the tank is getting low. So somebody will run down and hot swap it so patients don't end up suffocating. On to kind of some of the patients that I saw. This is kind of actually it's a CT, but it's not a video of a 8-month-old kiddo who actually had shrapnel that entered her brain from the front left. And ultimately it went through, but she survived, and she's lucky because it actually didn't penetrate all the way through and cause kind of massive bleeding outside of her head. Unfortunately, she did get a lot of intracerebral bleeding, and this kid ended up, neurologically changed and has seizures now and everything. Um, yeah. This same patient, when I talk about the fragmentation of care in Gaza, we wanted to take her to go get a CT. There's no CT at the Children's Hospital. There's only a CT. There's one CT machine for 500,000 people in North Gaza at the Baptist Hospital. And so we had to put her in an ambulance, and she's a child who's on a ventilator, but there's no ventilators to take, and the ambulances don't have ventilators. And so, there's another picture where you can see it better. We actually had to manually bag her for like 45 minutes in between going from one hospital to the next, getting her on the CT bed, examining her, and then taking her back. Too often in our media and our news, which I feel like this group probably doesn't need this, but there's a demonization of Black and brown bodies. And so this child, in addition to sustaining shrapnel in her head, sustained a shrapnel injury in her neck and needed to go back to the operating room for like a further repair. And so that's why we ended up getting the CT image. And so after we came back from the CT and we talked to dad and told him that she would have to go back to the OR, this dad has lost his wife and he lost his other child in the airstrike that injured his kid. And so seeing a hairy brown Arab man, I could say that because I'm a hairy brown Arab man, um, who in any other media would be viewed as scary, singing to this child and telling her how much he loves her. Mind you, a child who's not conscious, and telling her how much he loves her and how he can't wait to see her again when she's out of the OR and they're gonna go home. It brought me to tears. Like at the end of the day, Palestinian parents in Gaza don't love their kids any less. They just have to learn how to let them go. And so this man is just so full of like compassion for this little girl. One of my other patients is Habiba Naskari. And so, in addition to, just making it difficult to practice medicine in Gaza, even for patients who had really bad medical conditions, Habiba had a condition that causes clotting in all of her arteries. And so, the medication for it is rare, but it's available outside of Gaza. And we were not able to get it while we were in Gaza. And so, we recommended her evacuation. You can see over here, her hand is a little bit necrotic. Her other hand is also necrotic, and one of her feet was also necrotic. And so we recommended for her to be evacuated. Ultimately, it took, this was while we were in the north, it took about a week to get her evacuated to the south so that she would be closer to Kerem Shalom crossing so that she could be evacuated from Gaza. Um, the holdup was that while she had gotten permission to cross Netzarim, they had not granted permission to any of her family members to go with her. This is a 3-year-old child who was being evacuated for what most likely and actually ended up being a triple amputation, and they did not want to send her mother with her. While we were working in the hospital, sometimes the power would go out and you would just get by on cell phone lights or headlamps and just mid-operation. Most of the hospitals are solar powered. They're using batteries, but sometimes, they can't keep up. When we would get mass casualty incident, when they would get mass casualty incidents at the Baptist hospital, this is the hospital that I slept in, the Gaza General Services Hospital. And so the patients who would survive, they would bring them from the Baptist hospital to our hospital for trauma surgery. And so we would get a call that, 8, 10 patients are going to show up waiting to go to the operating room or who need, emergency surgery. And so all of us who just lived there, we would just go down and help out in the OR. And so I was helping just kind of start some fluids for this guy because his blood pressure was crashing because he ended up getting a leg amputation. Um, we ended up actually getting a chance to go to a Shifa hospital. A Shifa hospital is the largest hospital in Gaza and Palestine, and compares to some of the largest hospitals in the United States. It was like a 980-bed hospital. I promise you, any community hospital within a 50-mile radius of you is smaller than a Shifa. And so this is just their surgery building. Down here was the emergency room. This was the inpatient side. And then behind this, there was a 200-bed maternity hospital, which also served as the neonatal ICU. And so inside a Shifa hospital, common theme, these hospitals are lit on fire even after being destroyed. And so this wall is covered in ash. And so we actually started kind of drawing and leaving messages for the people in Gaza. This is what the inside of a Shifa looks like. When it burns, the plaster falls off the walls. Everything is destroyed and covered in ash. This is the emergency room, like medium acuity waiting area. And so just this one part, like makes up usually about a third of an ER, is about 50 to 60 beds in this one space just because of how big it is. And so a Shifa hospital was the people in Gaza would say it was the beating heart of Gaza. This was where all the medical specialists were. This was where all the most difficult surgeries would happen. Oh, sorry. There is a content warning. There is a couple medical images. This is not by any means entirely about that. One of them is coming up right now. And I think there's one more down the line. And so these are, I don't know if you've seen, this is a 3-year-old child who ended up getting a shrapnel injury that went in his left lower back. It thankfully missed his lung, but it tore through his diaphragm, tore through his spleen and destroyed it. The spleen is a very heavily vascularized organ. People will bleed out from splenic injuries, and so it had to be removed. The pancreas, we had to remove about 2/3 of it. His large intestine as well had to be removed. And then being in close proximity to explosions, it destroys soft tissue, and so you get kind of holes in the small intestine. So they had to remove part of his small intestine that was bleeding too heavily. All of this is from shrapnel. This is the piece of shrapnel that we pulled out of this kid. I actually have it saved. I can show it to Jason at some point if he wants. But it is about the size of a quarter. And you can see the problem is it has serrated edges and it's moving incredibly fast. And so when it gets inside of a body cavity, it just shreds everything. Um, um, Despite everything, this child was a lucky child because he did not have shrapnel in the brain, like that other baby I mentioned. And hopefully, it's a long road to recovery, but hopefully he can recover. The kids that really were difficult for me to deal with are the kids who unfortunately did get shrapnel in their brain. And we didn't have a pediatric neurosurgeon with us. And so if that ever happened, you would have to, finish stabilizing everything you could with the patient and then just accept that they may not survive. And so we would put them on a stretcher in the back and just kind of watch and wait and see what ended up happening. Sometimes, like that baby, they survived. Sometimes, like this patient, they did not. So this is another like 4-year-old kid who came into the ED when I was working one time at the Baptist Hospital in a mass casualty incident. We stitched up the lacerations he had on his arms and legs, washed them out. They were kind of bigger. And then the parents, and then we kind of moved on. And then to the next patient, because you have to kind of move quickly and switch if somebody seems like they're stabilized to the next patient. And so after we had dealt with another patient, I turned around and parents were there and they're like, hey, he's not really behaving the same way he does normally. Um, could you take a look at him? And so we talked to him that like, well, bomb blasts can also cause concussion, so it's not unusual to have abnormal behavior. And then they mentioned to me that, well, he's sleeping more than normal, which is a sign of brain injury. And then they asked me, oh, you closed up all his other lacerations. Do you mind closing up this one on the side of his head? For perspective, this is this kid's ear. This is that tiny little hole. This is about the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen. But when we saw this, we knew that we had to get him into the CT immediately. We got him into the CT. He had already had pretty severe internal bleeding in his brain, and it ended up causing too much pressure on his brain. And so when this kid came back from the CT, he was out. He was not waking up anymore. And so we put him on a stretcher in the back and just kind of moved on to the next patient. But this is a child who was killed by something smaller than a pebble. This is what the actual morgue on the outside looks like. This is at the Baptist Hospital. This was on a more calm night. You can see there's like 2 or 3 small body bags here. And we have big body bags as well as small body bags that were used for kids. On the night that the ceasefire was declared, but had not gone into effect, typically bombing and fighting and all that increases around the time the ceasefire is declared. And so this entire morgue was filled with bodies. We actually started stacking bodies on the grass outside. When I talk about the green spaces being converted into graves, this is what I mean. This is the grave of Nusayba. One of the things that I would do is I would carry stickers with me to hand out to the kids to try and bring joy to them. And so this little girl, I was handing out a sticker to her, and she asked me to go and give a sticker to her friend. And so her friend is across the hospital, and so I was walking with her, and she goes, "Oh, this is my friend's sister. Can we please go put a sticker on her grave?" I didn't know how to respond to a 9-year-old asking me to go put a sticker on their friend's grave. And so I told her, I was like, take as many stickers as you want. And so we ultimately only ended up going and putting like 2 stickers there. But like, she's a child. She should not know what it means to have a friend who died traumatically. This is the back part of the Baptist Hospital. You can see over here used to be a children's playground. This green space when the Baptist Hospital was sieged was actually here, let me go back a little bit. Over here, you can see the wall is new. This is because when the Baptist Hospital was sieged, this is where Israeli tanks actually came through. And so when hospitals are sieged, you can't take patients out to bury them. And so they start burying them in the hospital. And so walking around here, just counting gravestones, I counted like 50 to 60 graves. Yeah, kind of more up and back because this is just one area. This is a playground that was ultimately destroyed. But there's just grave markers everywhere. Is that wonderful little girl? Mm. And so, and now Sticker's in the hospital. So this is the lighthearted part of this talk. I was handing out stickers in the hospital, and then I hear that hospital director that I showed you guys earlier going, "Who keeps putting stickers on our wall in our hospital? Who's making like, he's an older guy." And so he's like, "Man, where do these stickers keep coming from?" And so I was responsible for that. This was the day the was declared or like actually went into effect. And so there's just like kids who live at the hospital because either their family member is a person who works there or they're taking refuge there as well. And so we became friends. And so we were all celebrating and took happy pictures with each other. This is my friend who's an emergency medicine doctor in Southern California. And so once the ceasefire was actually went into effect, we were able to leave the hospital and go and kind of actually see what things looked like. And so this is actually the inside of a UNRWA school. You can see it's no longer a school; it's been converted into housing, and there's just people that live in every classroom. At the same time, again, green space is being used as graves. This is beside the UNRWA school. This girl was just showing us around, and we had to walk through this to get to the inside of the school. Um, for those that say Gaza is completely demolished and there is no hope of anybody living there, I present to you this picture of a bunch of buildings in Gaza City. Again, they won't pass an inspection, but this is a place for people to live while Gaza is rebuilt. We were inside a hospital here, and so this is on the ground floor. I blew up this balloon for this little kid, and she was cute and took a picture with us and decided she liked this nurse who did nothing for her. Oh God, more than me, but it's okay. And so when the ceasefire was declared, we actually went to the offices of the Rahma Worldwide organization we went with, and they're like on the fifth floor, and so you could kind of see all around Gaza. And so any open spaces have been turned into camps for people. And this is actually Israel in the background. Like the distance between these things is incredibly close. Um, but yeah, but so these are all just little mini refugee camps. And then these are kids playing at the entrance. I can't help myself. I like recording kids just being kids, using even the door as a swing. We also were more comfortable just kind of being outdoors in general. I don't know if this is going to load. This is me playing Duck Duck Goose with the kiddos, which in Arabic is was but yeah. We were able to go to a mosque because, again, remember, mosques were previously high risk zones. And so we were able to go to a mosque for the first Friday prayer in Gaza after a ceasefire. And so when we were in this mosque, which is, a building that's over 2,000 years old, like it was previously like a pagan temple and then became a church and then became a mosque. And so we just found part of, I don't know, I think this is a bomb just hanging out here. This is actually what the mosque looks like. This was the oldest mosque in Gaza, but it was bombed and destroyed as well. People pray on the outside, kind of, I don't know, plaza area now, but you can see like it's just so old. Like I just felt bad, like even about just like the history that's being destroyed. But to some degree, that's intentional. And then I turn around and you can see what the actual inside of the mosque looks like. So this is actually right here. This is actually where people used to pray. There used to be a roof over all of this. There's a minaret in the distance, but the roof has been completely brought down. You can see kind of the tops of the columns, how high the roof was. And since it is an old building, the roof was built of just like bricks and stone. And so when it was destroyed, it just filled in the building entirely. But like that's where the ground is, and we're standing above the level of the ground just because of the rubble. People also started digging their families out of the rubble on that first day. And so while I was hanging out at the Baptist hospital, this truck pulled up and it smelled very strong. And so I was surprised. I was like, what's going on in this truck? Like, why'd they bring it here? Like, take it somewhere else. And then afterwards, when they pulled up next to the morgue, I understood what it was. And so we went and we helped unload these people. But these are people in advanced stages of decay. And like they, while I was carrying this body that's wrapped up in gray, like it actually leaked down my hand. But like, there are people that want to bury their loved ones. We were able to go to the north in Gaza as well. The level of destruction that has been sustained by the north is unprecedented. There's places in the north that look like Rafah where every building has been destroyed. There's a kid just hanging out on top of the rubble of her house. When we tried going to the far north, the first day of the ceasefire, we were unable to get there because there was a whole caravan of people in the way. But these are actually people walking from the north back south because they had lived in Gaza City. And when the ceasefire was announced, the area that they're trying to go to is a place known as Jenin. Jenin was a red zone. Anybody in Jenin was considered a combatant and was liable to be killed. And so people evacuated and left towards like Gaza City and whatnot. And so these people, first day of the ceasefire, started trying to walk back to Jenin to see, or sorry, not Jenin, Jabalia. Jenin is in the West Bank. Jabalia, trying to go to Jabalia to see if their homes were still there. And so this is all people who had packed up all their belongings, taken down their tent and tried going north and got there and realized that they could not recognize even where their house was on, because of just all the rubble was mixed in with each other. This is what it looks like in the north. Like you can't tell where one building ends and where the next begins. This is actually a really rare sight. Everything otherwise just kind of in general looks like this. And still there's a Palestinian flag waving in the distance. While we were walking around in the north, we stumbled upon human remains. This is the left lower part of a person's skull. And so we took it and we buried it just out of respect for the person. But this is not an uncommon occurrence, especially in areas that were previously like, military only. And, you just find body parts and skulls and stuff like that while walking around. We were able to go to visit the Kamal Adwan Hospital. Kamal Adwan Hospital was very famous because it was the last hospital functioning in the far north of Gaza. It's also the hospital that my colleague and one of my inspirations, even for going on this Gaza trip, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, worked at. And so, again, this is a children's hospital that has cribs in it. Doesn't matter. But yeah. For those that know, these are children's-sized equipment, but like it's just all left there because they destroyed the hospital. This is going through supplies on the floor of the hospital to see what we could save and bring back to the health department because we're always short supplies in Gaza, and so I'm going through antibiotics here to see what's been burned and what hasn't. This is the very famous picture of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia outside of Kamal Adwan Hospital when he went to go confront the Israeli tanks and try and appeal kind of for a peaceful resolution when they decided to siege the hospital. Hussam Abu Safia is really famous for saying, "I will leave when the last patient leaves." And so he's an inspiration to me. And so it's a little cheesy, but when I went there, I went and I walked the same path he did. And I thought what his thoughts must have been going through this, walking up to the person who had destroyed the hospital and killed his son. His son is actually buried in the hospital, appealing for his patients. It's in another hospital, the Indonesian hospital in the north. This actually used to be an Israeli military base during the occupation of Gaza. And then when they took over in the north, they actually used it as a military base again. When we got to the hospital, the health department had been there for like a couple hours. And so they were telling us that they went through the hospital and they identified 9 bodies in the hospital, 8 of which they were able to figure out who they were and return them to their family. This is the 9th person. He's too decayed to figure out who he was. And so they put him in a bag and they put his backpack on top of him in the hope that his family would be able to identify him. This is the inside of the Indonesian hospital, and you can see there's bullet holes in the walls. Actually, every one of the rooms, I don't have the picture here, but I can pull it up if anybody's really interested. Every one of the rooms has a green check mark by it because when they went through the hospital, they were clearing it, and so this was used as a military outpost. Another hospital in Beth Hanun, which is also very far north. Again, you see cribs. Doesn't matter if it's a children's hospital, it is liable to be destroyed. There's some picture map of all the hospitals that used to exist in Gaza. Gaza used to have about 36 hospitals. They're very proactive. They rebuild the hospitals as fast as they can. But ultimately, the far north had like three hospitals, four hospitals for treating 500,000 people. The south had another like four hospitals, and so most of Gaza's medical infrastructure has been destroyed. Despite everything, this is also in the far north. Gaza manages to be beautiful, and I tried to show that as well. I enjoyed my time there, as perverse as that sounds. Um, but yeah, and so this was day two of the ceasefire, and people are already coming in with what they can to try and pick up and rebuild. The war continues for the people who have been injured and who are still suffering, despite, at the time there having been a ceasefire. This is a 12-year-old boy who suffered a laceration in his spinal cord due to shrapnel, and he's a paraplegic for life, and so he just lived in the ICU with us. This is that same baby. You can see the bag a little bit better. I gotta fix the order of these slides. This is actually the hole in her skull. It's so tiny. And like I missed it when I was looking for it a bunch of times. But that's all it took. This same girl, when we took her back to the OR, sorry, this is the other content warning. I don't know how interested people are medically. You can see that like the tear she had in her trachea is so big that even the esophagus, even the tube that we had to try and create a tracheostomy for her wouldn't work. And so ultimately, tracheostomy tubes usually have a balloon on them to get a good hold inside the trachea. And so they actually pulled the balloon back and inflated it in her trachea because we didn't have a tube that big to put in the massive hole she has in it so she can breathe. This is that kid who had the shrapnel in his stomach. Before we left, I managed to get a picture of him. He's looking better. He's got a little bit of stool out of the colostomy they created that comes out of his abdomen. This is the team I worked with while I was in the ICU. None of these are actually ICU doctors. They are doctors with other specialties, but they're doctors with a lot of experience who stepped up when they were asked to. Kids are going to be kids. It doesn't matter. These are down to electrical wires. I was freaking out originally, but then I remembered there's no power in Gaza, and so they're okay. But they turned it into a switch. No, let me see if I can turn up the volume for this one. And so we managed to go to a school. So, one of the things to notice is the range of ages of the kids. It's because all the kids have been out of school for different times, different length of time. But yeah, and then they also learn English because like the primary, secondary, like the secondary language that people speak in Gaza is English, and so they're learning the alphabet. They're super cute though. We're handing out lollipops. When we finally, so we got trapped in the north. For those who don't know, we got trapped for like 6 days because Israel would not allow us to cross the Netzarim corridor that they allowed us to cross while they were still at war. They would not allow us to cross it to go south. And so this is the day we finally got permission to go south. It was also the first day that they were allowing people from the south to come north. And so we had to take the same road everybody else was taking. So there are hundreds of thousands of people who had fled to the south who were trying to come back to the north with all their life's possessions. You guys will appreciate this, I think, more than most. That dude on the left right here, he's actually American. And so we had a fun conversation with like, what the hell are you doing here? He's from Tallahassee, Florida. So he's an American military contractor. Part of the ceasefire agreement was that they would set up an inspection point for anybody coming from the south. Who's going to man that inspection point? Well, they decided who better than private military contractors. So that dude makes like $6,000 a day, by the way. He makes a ton of money. Like that's more than I make in a week. Anyways. But so he thought it was so interesting how people in Gaza didn't hate him and people were high-fiving him all day. And I was like, dude, like, are you that dumb? Like you're letting people go back to their homes. He's like, yeah, but like they told us like they're gonna hate us because we're American. I was like, oh my God, get off Fox News. But either way, so that's how the military checkpoint is in the South. This is Habiba. Habiba, after she made it to the south, ended up spending another week and a half in the south before she was finally able to be evacuated. I actually ended up leaving Gaza before she did. And like in my heart, I just wanted to take her with me and go because you can see the necrosis is actually spread. It's actually above both of her elbows at that point, and then also on one of her feet. And so ultimately, after so many appeals from the World Health Organization, CNN did multiple stories about her, up to and including even the King of Jordan himself appealed to Israel personally to be able to evacuate this kid with Jordanian helicopters. She kept on getting delayed, but eventually made it out. But because of the delay, ended up getting both of her arms and one of her legs amputated. But again, kids are freaking amazing. And she's just so cute when she's happy. Like I couldn't help it. I had to put in a couple pictures of her smiling. Her brother makes her smile. But this is Habiba now. And then this is the day that we tried that we ended up going to the north. We just took drone footage of just pulling back from us. There's us and the local actors on the ground that we worked with. Um, yeah. And then you just kind of pulls out and you can see all of Gaza in the distance. And so there's still buildings in Gaza, y'all. Don't believe the news. But yeah, I mean, that's what the experience was like. I mean, thank you all for, just being here and hearing me out while I talk through this. Um, it's really helpful to have that safe space. It's almost therapeutic.